We encourage you to hit the subscribe button right now so you can listen to more podcasts of Operation Truth. Ladies and gentlemen, we do want to hear from you, so we encourage you to email us directly at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. I want you to know that your messages are likely to be heard, addressed, and listened to on air.
Operation Truth, the show they don't want you to see. Now, here's your host, Lou.
This is Lou Palumbo. Welcome to Operation Truth. I remind you, you can communicate with us through operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. The issues that we speak about are highly relevant. We are gravely concerned about the future of our children. With me, as always, is my co-host, Tom Fuentes. Tom is a former assistant director of the FBI with a rather distinguished career. Also joining us today, again, is Rick Robillard. Rick, again, has had a very distinguished career in the FBI. His most recent post was, I believe, he was the he was the special agent in charge of Criminal Intelligence Division of the Bureau. They're going to give you a lot of interesting information and perspective on what is transpiring today domestically and even on an international basis. So I want to bring them both in. I promised my co-host, Tom, I would no longer rant on these highly relevant topics regarding the border and the cities and our economy and the big lies we're being told to today. So I gave
No, that's
Tom
not
my
true,
word.
Lou. I didn't say don't rant. I said try to keep it under an hour.
Oh, he said rant less. Rant less is what it was.
Yeah, rant less.
So I am going to honor Tom's request because it is important that I bring him into this conversation sooner. So without further ado, I welcome both of you gentlemen today, Rick and Tom. I want to kick this off about this whole discussion about intelligence failure. And, you know, this is really more your wheelhouse than mine. I have a little bit of understanding as to what transpired based on some of my journey, my travels, people I've had the good fortune to intersect with. But I know you two guys know about this intelligence stuff. So I want to first come to you, Tom, and ask you, from my position, I'm having a hard time understanding this intelligence failure that took place that involved the MI6 from the United Kingdom, our CIA, Massad, and Shin Bet from Israel's perspective. Did this really happen? Or my question is, were they prepared to allow this to happen? I'm going to come to you first, Tom. And Rick, get ready.
Well, I don't think we know that for sure, Lou. As far as an intelligence failure, you can have a failure a couple of different ways. One of them is you don't get the intelligence that you should have gotten, that you don't have enough collection mechanisms, whether it's signals intelligence or human intelligence. You don't have enough sources. You're not pursuing information aggressively or using diplomacy with other countries and their agencies to gather intelligence. That's one way you have a failure. You don't get the information. The second way is you get the information, but you choose to ignore it. You choose to, senior leadership gets it and says, wait a minute, you know, these analysts, do they really know what they're talking about? Did they dream this up? Do they really believe it? You know, you have that. And we've had so many times in history of that. You go back to the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, and Bletchley Park, the intel center of the British in London, was telling the generals the Germans are gearing up to attack, which became the Battle of the Bulge. No, they didn't believe that. That's ridiculous. And then they had the Battle of the Bulge, and a number of people were killed in that. So we've had episodes along the way in our country, in other countries, where the intelligence was provided, senior intel analysts sent it up the chain, and then senior officials chose to either ignore it or discount it or somehow didn't believe that. Now, what we're hearing currently in relation to the October 7 Hamas attack on Israel was that from a variety of sources, the Israelis were getting intelligence that Hamas was preparing an attack. Now, some of that information came from the Egyptians. And Egypt and Israel had a pretty good relationship going back to 1973. And then you have the analyst, and this has been reported in the Israeli newspapers recently, and then in the New York Times, that Israeli analysts, a team of analysts, had discovered a year ago that Hamas was up to something. They're planning some attack across the border from Gaza into Israel, and they're going to kill Israeli citizens. And the reporting is, we don't know positively if it's true, but the reporting is in the media that the senior Israeli IDF, their defense force officials, didn't believe the intelligence. They thought, well, these analysts, they're inexperienced, or they're young, or one of the reports was they weren't trusted because they were female. That's what's been reported. Again, we don't know if any of that's really true, but according to the reporting that's just been within the last week, the Israeli senior officials had been informed by lower level analysts that Hamas was preparing an attack.
So I want to go to you, Rick, and get your perspective on this conversation, because I know you dealt with this whole issue of intelligence on various levels. How did this happen, and did it happen, or were they prepared, as our president once referred to as what took place in the Ukraine, a mild incursions that went horribly wrong? Rick, what are you thinking?
Well, I think right now we're relying largely on media reporting, which is not always 100% accurate. My gut feeling, just looking at what happened, is this is likely to be an intelligence failure. Intelligence is really about getting the right information to the right people at the right moment in time. No question, I'm not going to question a year ago somebody found a plan to attack, or there were other pieces of information that flowed in. But do they have the capability to attack? I mean, as we look now and see almost an endless supply of rockets being fired from Gaza, were the Israelis aware that they had that much munitions that they could actually carry out an attack? So is it a matter of getting pieces of intelligence without really knowing that they do have a capability? The way it's being reported is it was viewed as an aspirational plan, but they really wouldn't be able to carry out such a plan. So I'm, having been in charge of criminal intelligence, I'm perhaps more critical and more concerned to know for sure at what point did this break. And we really don't know that. Now, you would rely on the Israelis for human intelligence. They're the closest on the ground. There are other sources for signal intelligence and financial transaction intelligence, but I at this moment in time, I would believe it is more likely that there was some breakdown in the flow of intelligence than it was that somebody in the Israeli government just decided, say for political reasons, not to act.
I want to ask you, gentlemen, this, which is highly, I would say, more significantly relevant to our concerns in the United States. Should we be concerned that an intelligence breakdown of this nature exists now, especially as critical as things appear to have gotten? You know, I mean, in other words, we kind of shifted gears on October 7th here, and now there's a lot of individuals in dissent. There's a lot of chatter, a lot of talk. Are we, or should we be worried about our intelligence community? I'm going to come to you, Rick, then go to you next, Tom.
Yeah, I think we should always be worried about it, Lou. And I think one of the things that concerns me as I look at Israel is, did they rely too heavily on technology rather than human sources? Did they convince themselves because of signal intelligence and other forms of intelligence that there was really no threat there, and not have the human resources that might have flagged it for them? Could we be in the same position here in our country? So anytime you see like I said, an ally attacked and they didn't see it coming, and for God's sake, I mean, if Israel misses a Hamas attack, yeah, I mean, we should be concerned.
Tom,
we want to know where it broke and how it broke.
Tom, your feelings?
Yeah, I agree with Rick that, you know, especially with regard to our own safety of our own country, you know, we know that in the past 3+ years that we've had about 8 million people pour across our southern border into the United States. And most, if not most, the majority are gotaways. In other words, they weren't even checked out or vetted in any way, shape, or form by our border officials. They just poured in and have spread out throughout the country. Now we know, let's start looking at some of the facts. We know that Hamas and Hezbollah separately have facilities in Mexico. And being that close and that many terrorists, and not knowing how many people came across our border that are terrorists, and knowing these guys could just walk in, now what? How vulnerable are we? So that wouldn't be an intelligence failure, because it would mean that our intelligence agencies and our border protection agencies have no clue of the identity. I think an intelligence failure would be they had specific information of a specific individual or group of individuals that were coming across to do an attack, and we didn't follow them, we didn't track them, we lost sight of them, all of that. I think the fact that we have a wide open border, it wouldn't be an intelligence failure. It's a policy failure on the part of the United States government to not protect the borders.
Tom, so I want to ask you a question first, buddy, because you just made a comment about Hamas and its presence in Mexico. Are you suggesting that there's a possibility that they could be collaborating with cartels, drug cartels?
No, not necessarily. They could be doing what they want down there. As far as their relationship with cartels, we don't know that. Typically, the cartels in the past have been, if you don't interfere with them, they're not going to worry about it. They don't necessarily have to have a relationship between the cartels and Hamas or Hezbollah, or an agreement to cooperate or to help each other. Now, there's nothing to stop that from happening, but they don't necessarily have to do it. We do know that our cartels are walking around, and we have video of them carrying some of the sophisticated shoulder fire weapons that we sent to Ukraine and to the Middle East in the past. And they're very expensive pieces of equipment. We see them literally walking around on the Mexico side of the border, carrying these shoulder fired, very sophisticated weapons. In some cases, those weapons are $1 million a piece, and they have possession of many of them. So now, where do the weapons come from? We don't know. We don't know if that's in the supply that we left behind, again, on purpose in Afghanistan, when we left Afghanistan a couple of years ago, and that those weapons, we knew that a majority of those, the Taliban then became the biggest weapons bazaar in the world, bringing some of those weapons to other countries in Europe to go on the market, to be sold in the Middle East, Africa, the United States, Mexico, wherever. So we have a number of issues that we don't know the answers to, and any one of these could turn up to be the basis of a terrorist attack at some point.
So Rick, I want to come to you for a moment, if I may. Rick, Tom just made a very interesting point, once again, alluding to this withdrawal from Afghanistan and leaving billions of dollars of weaponry there. I'm just curious, is there a reason why, upon our departure, that our government didn't see fit to destroy this weaponry rather than have it fall into the hands of the Taliban, drug cartels, Hamas, any number of people? I mean, if you guys look at the news, we're watching it, some of the individuals in the news carrying our M4s, and they're our adversaries, or the adversaries of Israel and the Ukraine. So Rick, what do you think? What do you think about what I just asked? Why didn't the government destroy them before we abandoned Bagram and left? I'm hearing as much as $85 billion in weaponry. I'm sorry, guys. Rick?
Not a clue, Lou. I could take some guesses. I suspect Tom knows specifically more. My guess is we left so fast without a lot of planning, and we didn't destroy the stuff we left behind. That's a guess. Tom, you probably know more than I do about that topic. But there is an issue regarding...
Tom, your opinion?
Yeah. Was widely talked about toward the end of the Trump administration, that he was arguing with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, about having those weapons. Particularly, we had helicopters there, state of the art, tanks, armored carriers, handguns, machine guns, ammunition, rockets, shoulder-fired rockets. And allegedly, Trump had told Milley, get that stuff out. Take it to Pakistan, take it to another ally. Don't let it stay there and just lie there on the ground or abandoned for the Taliban to get a hold of when we came out. Now, later, it was reported that the Biden administration had a particular timetable that they were in an extreme hurry to get out and did not follow through what Trump had wanted. None of the weapons were shipped to a neighboring nearby friendly country for safekeeping. We left all of this equipment. Now, not all of it could be easily sold at a weapons bazaar for terrorist organizations, let's say, or criminal organizations. So, when you see a cartel member in Mexico walking around with a shoulder-fired weapon, which is designed to shoot down helicopters, then, that a person can be trained in short order how to operate that weapon with a heat-seeking weapon missile on the end of it to shoot down a helicopter. You're not going to, the actual helicopters themselves that we left behind, that's going to take some training for somebody to be able to fly that helicopter. And it would be more difficult to transport it from Afghanistan to Mexico or Africa or other countries. So,
Tom, can I ask you a question, sir? But in reference to, say, a sophisticated helicopter, isn't it possible that they could then just dismantle this helicopter and figure out how it was built to replicate it? You know what I'm saying, Tom? Kind of like
well, yeah, and what they could do there
property.
is, if they don't have the engineers for it, they could certainly sell it to somebody like China, Russia, another country, who could then do what you're talking about, reverse engineer it, see how we put it together, what are the capabilities. You recall the reporting at the time of the U.S. SEAL team going into Pakistan and killing bin Laden. And the helicopters that they flew in there, one of them failed. And then they arranged to bomb it, not let it sit there intact so that it could be sold to bad guys, could be re-engineered by another country. And in that case, then we destroyed it on the ground. We sabotaged it theoretically so they wouldn't be able to reverse engineer it. Now, the helicopters and other more sophisticated devices that we left on the ground in Afghanistan, yeah, the Taliban, you wouldn't expect the average Taliban person to do anything sophisticated with any of that kind of equipment, but they could sell it to somebody who could. So they could be arms merchants to the world, basically, and especially to China, Russia, other adversarial countries that could have the engineering capability to take helicopters apart, look how we put them together, figure out how fast they can go, what the avionics were capable of in terms of missile guidance and other systems, sophisticated systems within those aircraft. So certainly, even if the Taliban had no use for it to use it, they certainly could use it to sell and enrich themselves with it.
Okay, so I want to go back now to this whole intelligence failure discussion that we started with. And I want to ask you about 9/11. And both of you guys had intimate knowledge of intelligence and the dealings of the country at the time. So Tom, as long as you're on the floor, I'm going to ask you first, and Rick, I'm going to come to you. Explain, if you can, as best as you can, the intelligence failure that took place leading up to 9/11.
Well, first of all, we don't have all of the facts of that. So someone like me, and I was in the FBI still at that time, we wouldn't have known all of the reporting that went to our national security division people, experts, what they knew, how they knew it, what was being reported to them. The other side of that is the allegations that were made that the CIA, NSA, DIA from the military, other agencies had information about some of the individuals, especially the Saudi people that ended up being involved in flying the aircraft, that they had information that they didn't specifically share with the FBI. And the FBI, as the principal domestic security agency, should have known a lot more than it knew. So there's a lot of discrepancy, who knew what, when they knew it, how they knew it, what they did with it. But I can tell you, having been at that time heavily involved in meetings with NSA and CIA, that the Department of Justice determined that we should have a wall between law enforcement and the intelligence community on what information could be shared. And that wall persisted until after 9/11, when they loosened up the rules, and then we could share a much greater amount of information with each other across the wall or over the wall, as it was described. And there was a lot of discrepancies over what was allowed. I attended probably 2 or 3 dozen meetings at Fort Meade, the headquarters of NSA, at Langley, the headquarters of the CIA, and at FBI headquarters. And we had a group of us executives that rotated among the 3 agencies to discuss the very issue: how much intelligence, how much classified information can we share with each other between the intel community and law enforcement. And at that time, there was a tremendous amount of restrictions on what law enforcement could get from the intel community. Now, after 9/11, of course, much was loosened up in terms of what could be shared. But at that time, it was very difficult. And I'll give you an example. I went to my first meeting at NSA on the topic in the late 60s. The admiral that was running NSA at the time, and I can't recall his name, but he's not somebody in the news now. But anyway, the admiral comes into our meeting, and you have a number of executives from the FBI, other agencies, as well as CIA and NSA. And he comes into the meeting and he starts out with, "Today, gentlemen, we're going to talk about the F word." Really? The F word? Yeah, the F word being felony. If you improperly share this information with each other, if you, in law enforcement, kind of pointing at me, if you improperly task the intel community and receive information that you shouldn't have received from them, you're committing a felony. And because that would be beyond the scope of your employment, you would not be entitled to a government-appointed attorney. You'd be on your own. You could lose your property, your freedom, you name it, if you do that improperly. And again, you have to defend yourself. So you're completely on your own if that happens. That's how that meeting started out. That was the policy at the time. This would have been, late 60s. And, that's the restrictions. You knew you were under these kind of restrictions.
So, Rick, I want to ask you about this 9/11 intel. I don't want to call it a failure, but something slipped through the cracks. Would you agree with that, Rick?
Yeah, I think something slipped through the cracks. The process Tom described was actually under my direct supervision, a part of the criminal intel section that I handled, the so-called Chinese wall, the passing of intelligence information into the criminal community. It's been publicly reported, but not commonly discussed, that a field division of the FBI actually had sent to headquarters a memo talking about how people were taking flight lessons, not interested in learning how to land or take off, just wanted to know how to fly. Paraphrasing it, it said that, in effect, they could be planning an attack with aircraft. Well, that's a piece of information. I think if that had been mapped to the information that was available to the agencies Tom previously described, we might have had that information getting to the right person at the right time to make it actionable so we can do something about it. For the viewers, our country is very sensitive to collecting intelligence on foreign enemies versus collecting any kind of intelligence on U.S. citizens. The laws prevent us from purposefully collecting or spying on U.S. citizens. Outside the United States, you can pretty much do anything you want. But Congress has always had a fear that there would be a backdoor somehow, that the criminal piece would use the intelligence piece to advance criminal cases. And right now, as we speak, there's a debate going on in Congress about Section 7720 of the FISA Act. And what Section 720 does is, it allows intelligence agencies effectively to tap the phones of people outside of the United States and collect information. As written now, under current law, the FBI is allowed to query that database. In case, let's say, for example, like Tom described, say we got Hamas terror groups in Mexico. Well, the FBI can't tap their phones, but maybe the CIA.
Who does tap their phones? The CIA?
NSA probably. So we have we have collection capabilities as a government, but we're very sensitive that they not be used against American citizens. The current law is.
This, Rick, if I can interrupt you for a second, because we're talking about tapping phones or garnering information in a country such as Mexico.
Yeah.
So if our CIA or NSA bump into information that could possibly lend itself to compromise the safety of our country, are we sharing it? Because that's one of the criticisms that came after 9/11, right? They were saying our agencies weren't sharing information. So where do we sit today, Rick, in regards to that? If the CIA, the NSA gather information, right, develop intel, are we sharing it with our FBI?
If they develop intel that they have specific information about an attack against the United States, they're certainly going to report that up and share it. No question about it. But the potential disconnect is they have a piece of information, the FBI has a piece of information, and it takes those two pieces of information to know what's going on. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So under current law right now, if the FBI has an investigation and it has developed, let's say there's somebody who in the United States is associated or believed to be associated with Hamas or a sympathizer to Hamas. Under current law, the FBI can search that. Now we have cause to search that database to see whether or not that individual we're looking at is in communication with a foreign terrorist group.
Guys, if I may, I want to take a quick break. And then when we come back, I want to talk to the both of you about the 5 eyes in the intelligence community, which is, I think, something that's going to be new to the ears of many of our listeners. Stay with us, guys. This is Operation Truth. We have with us today Rick Robillard. He's a former special agent in charge of the Criminal Intelligence Division of the FBI, and Tom Fuentes, a former assistant director of the FBI, who, among other things, was involved in overseeing organized crime and the international operation of the FBI. I believe it was like 70 or 80 countries. Tom can further elaborate in a more accurate number. But we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come right back to you, and I'm going to talk to you about the 5 eyes and some other issues about the border that Tom brought up, because I have a real concern about operational control. Tom did speak to what we call gotaways, but he also made a comment about vetting. And I think it's important that the public hear what's lacking in vetting. We'll be right back, guys. Stay with us. We're back, ladies and gentlemen. And as I mentioned to you prior to the break, we have 2 very, in my opinion, distinguished individuals whose commitment to protecting this country and its citizens is unquestioned. And it's so sad, because I don't think you really ever will understand the extent of their commitment, which is, I'm going to use the term, overwhelming. Guys, I want to ask you about this, the 5 eyes in intelligence, which is something I doubt the American public has knowledge of. Tom, I'm going to start with you. Give us a little background, and Rick, I'm going to come to you about this relationship as well.
The 5 eyes, Lou, is an agreement among 5 of our closest allies that we will share everything we get with each other that's important to the other countries, and that we will never spy on each other. The countries, besides Canada, the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, the countries agreed to not do that. Now, when you were referring to, did Massad spy on us? Yeah, there were many cases in the FBI where convictions were attained. Israel was not one of the 5 Eye countries, which meant that they didn't have that higher level of trust that the UK and Canada, the other countries that belonged, did have with us. Now, in my role running the organized crime program and later international operations, we would have the 5 Eye meetings were rotating for where we met. So when it was in the US, my staff helped coordinate setting up the meeting, the hotels, and making sure they were secure and bug-proof, if you will. And then we rotated with the other countries. and took turns hosting Five Eye meetings. So there weren't any cases that we knew of for sure where one of these countries spied on us, violating the terms of the Five Eye Agreement.
I got to ask you a question, Tom. Why wasn't there a Six Eye? Why wasn't Israel involved in this, since they're such an integral part of gathering intel?
Probably because they were so busy spying on us that we didn't trust them.
Good
Fact.
answer. Rick, you want to shed some light on this conversation?
Yeah, I think, Tom, it's the U.S., Great Britain, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia have this agreement. The big kid on the block, of course, is the United States. A lot of this goes to signal intelligence, signal intercepts, and countries that trust one another share that information. I do find it a little bit surprising, and I think maybe Tom differs a little bit, that with this thing in Israel, that at least two of the eyes might not have picked up something. You start to wonder a little bit of, why didn't the United States pick up something on this planned attack? So it's just one of those things. It's not a red flag. It's a little bit of a yellow flag as to, how did these guys miss it too? But that's kind of how the Five Eyes works. As far as countries spying on one another, I think you can assume every country to some extent is going to spy on one another.
Is Israel part of the eyes now? Or have they become the Sixth Eye? Are they still not one of the intelligence?
No.
Boy, guys, I hate to say this to you, but that's extremely interesting, because I would think it would be important that they benefit from sharing of intelligence. And I'm going to go back to the beginning of this conversation today with this intelligence failure. Is there a possibility that if they had been one of the eyes in the intelligence community, right, that they may have gotten some more intel from various sources? It's a speculative question, of course, but I just find it interesting that a country that clearly should be a part of the eyes isn't. But I do want to ask you guys another question. Just give me 1 second, if you don't mind, because I did make some notes today, because there's so much to talk about today. We're hearing, Rick, and I think you brought this to the forefront in our conversations about this assassination squad that exists in Israel that we are not foreign to. We know historically, after the 1972 Munich kidnapping and hostage situation, that the Israelis put into place a plan to just systematically and methodically hunt down anyone that may have even been involved in the Munich hostage situation, and just eliminate them. And during the course of our conversation, I know you gentlemen will mention the mistake that was made in Norway. So what, are we surprised that Israel has formed an assassination squad, or that they're hell-bent at this point on hunting down anybody that may have acted in consort or supported on any level Hamas? Are we surprised to hear that? And what are our concerns or sensitivities? I'm going to come to you first, Rick. Then, Tom, I want you to express your concerns.
Sure. No, we're not surprised. I mean, it would almost be surprised if they didn't. But I think times are different now than they were in Munich, and I think the circumstances are different. My concern, to some extent, I'll characterize it as the tail wagging the dog. So Israel said, now we're going to basically go out, we're going to kill these guys, and it looks like they're in 3 different Middle Eastern countries. So they're going to send in assassination squads into an environment that is already hostile. So my thought goes like this. Let's say they do that. And let's say one of these countries decides that they have had a gutful of Israel and they're going to attack them. Are we obligated to back Israel's play? Are we obligated not just to tacitly say, well, that's okay, but are we going to start dropping bombs and fighting if somebody responds? What if Israel finds a Hamas member in the United States and comes here and assassinates them? What's the public reaction here in the country? What effect would that have on the funding of Israel? So, I think I'm sympathetic to Israel. I understand what they want to do. But to what extent are we obligated as a country to give them the bombs and the bullets to do what they want to do, and if they get in trouble, blindly support them?
That's a good question.
Those are the things that concern me.
Yeah, and those are legitimate concerns. And I do want to say one thing, because you use this term obligated. It's an interesting term when someone is obligated. Clearly, it's in our best interest to support Israel, I would say almost on an unconditional level, because of their strategic positioning, their ability to gather intelligence, which we benefit from as a rule. This seems to have been an exception. But these are really good questions. But I don't think that our country at any point in time would walk away from Israel in totality. And the three of us, along with TJ Stone, the producer of the show, have spoken about the fact that if the United States were ever to walk away from Israel, I don't think it would last a week, in all candor. And Tom, you mentioned the fact that, their bombs are our bombs, and along on the side of them is printed "Made in the USA." Tom, I want to come to you with this question, though, Tom, about this assassination squad. What are your feelings? I mean, Rick articulated some really very serious, legitimate concerns about going too far. I believe, if I recall correctly, we spoke about, you mentioned, Tom, back channels, low-level back channels, discussions. Talk about this, Tom.
Well, I think in the case of that assassination squad, which had been created, by their prime minister and highly trained to go hunt down individuals that were involved in the 1972 attack in Munich that killed Israeli athletes and coaches. So I think for the most part, we supported. We were aware, because they got a lot of attention in the media when some of these leaders started being killed in different countries around, the Middle East and in Europe. And finally, what happens, of course, is they make a mistake and kill an innocent civilian in Norway, and the whole world finds out about it. The Norwegians go after Israel. They want to bring charges against the people that committed the attack and charge them with murder for killing this poor, I think it was 20-some-year-old kid that they thought was one of the people involved in 1972 Munich, but wasn't. And so the movie Munich gives a pretty clear depiction of how the world opinion started to turn against Israel following that one. It was like, okay, you've gone too far. We understand in the beginning how terrible Munich was, and you wanted to retaliate and get these guys that did it, but now you're so aggressive, you're making mistakes, killing innocent people. And so they terminated the program. And then, of course, in the movie, it shows all kinds of PTSD on the assassins, how it was affecting them mentally to be involved in these assassinations. So that's a different situation than what we're seeing right now compared to the attacks in Gaza. That, again, what we see is Israel, and at the time of, by the way, I should go back to the attacks on the Munich participants, Israel's idea was, we want the whole world to know we're not this little defensive country. If you do stuff like that to us anywhere in the world, we're going to come and get you. That was the message, and they were more than happy that message went out publicly until I said earlier, they killed the wrong person.
Tom, if I can just say something to the both of you, tragically, their policy of assassinating people that participate in these activities is something that is necessary. By the way, Tom, I just want to bounce this off you, my friend. Do we have a policy similar to that in our country?
Well, I don't know it for a fact, but take your own guess.
Yeah.
Hey,
Lou,
go ahead, Rick, please.
Lou, I got a question for you. What makes us think that Israel is really all that important to us? What leads us to believe that they are critical for our? Yeah,
I'm going to answer that question for you, because, and I think you and I spoke about this, my friend.
Yeah,
I don't believe that they're as critical to us as they once were. I think that's part of the discussion. Maybe what's going on right now is an issue of loyalty, morality, a number of other issues that are tangential to need. You're right, Rick. You brought up something very interesting. I don't know if they're as instrumental in keeping us safe as they once were. And I hear everything you're saying, and I know where that thought process is going. And maybe it's about how much are we prepared to swing in the breeze. But I think it would be a very difficult pill to swallow if it lent itself to the annihilation and the elimination of that country and its people. But you know what, Rick? That's a really good question you posed. And now I hate to break this to you. I'm going to bounce that to Tom. Tom, what's your opinion about how important Israel is to us today in comparison to, say, 25, 30 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, the question would be, are they important to us militarily or to protect our interest in the Middle East? Some of that. Now, right now, you could argue that maybe not as important as we think or what they used to be if these other Middle Eastern countries turn on us. However, what we don't know is behind the scenes, and I'll back up a little bit, but during the Trump administration, you had the Abraham Accords. Much of the negotiations done by Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and a couple of other senior executives that worked with him. And many of these countries were signing agreements with Israel to share economically, to work together. And one of the most important countries in that deal that was just on the verge of signing the agreement was Saudi Arabia. Now, it's interesting, is that why the attack was ordered when it was on the part of Hamas and others to hurry up and do this and create a war of Arabs against Israel and Muslims against Israel, and then maybe that will sabotage these Abraham Accords. Now, I've read some reports, unofficial, that Saudi Arabia is encouraging Israel right now to eliminate Hamas. They're death on these terror groups. They didn't want anything to do with Al-Qaeda in their country or these other groups way back when we were at the height of the war on terror. And countries like Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, they're really behind the scenes on the side of Israel. They have no use for Hamas or any other terror group in their midst in these countries. And they would be more than happy if Israel could eliminate Hamas completely without the extra collateral damage of killing Muslims, killing innocent people, innocent, theoretically, Palestinians. And that's a big issue that we don't know all the behind the scenes facts concerning that. But I can tell you, when I was in the Bureau and working overseas, that we had incidents like that, where foreign countries publicly stated, we do not want the U.S. violating our sovereignty and attacking terror groups on our soil and all of that. And then behind the scenes, were giving us the exact coordinates to where to put our bombs to kill a group of them. And then after we did it, we had a little celebration together of way to go. Glad you guys did that. But publicly, they'd be screaming bloody murder of how could we do such a thing? So the fact that you would have behind the scenes duplicity, let's say, that's not unusual in these foreign issues.
I'm going to close the show today with you gentlemen in a moment. But I'm going to come back to Rick, because Rick posed this question about how vital is Israel to us today. So, Rick, since you opened this can of worms, I'm giving you the final comment for the day on this discussion. And guys, before we go, I'm going to remind you of some of the topics we're going to speak about in the next episode. Tom discovered something rather interesting, that a trucking organization in Nashville was fined $700,000 because they dare ask prospective employees if they were legitimately in the United States. As you may be following in the news, we had what I believe to be a terrorist attack in Paris involving some stabbings. And we're going to come back and talk about this high crime rate in our capital of all places, to where we're carjacking our FBI agents and elected officials. But I want to give you the close for today, Rick, since you opened up this discussion about how important is Israel to us now. What's your opinion?
I don't think it's that important in terms of national security. I'm not even sure they're that important in terms of intelligence. But I think there's a different issue on the table. I think we should support Israel. But I think it's more of a moral commitment to a people who were almost annihilated during the Holocaust, and even worse, no country in the world wanted them. Israel was created. It's the right thing to do, and I think we should support them. But I just don't believe that the justification really lies in our, not that they're not helpful and good, but I'm just not sure they're as important as maybe they were 20 years ago.
I think we agree on that, Rick, and you and I have
Yeah.
spoken off camera about that, and I think Tom shares that sentiment to a degree. I think the morality of the conversation is important, the length of the relationship, the nature of the relationship, not to forget that they once were important to us. Guys, we're going to wrap it today, but I do want to tell you, next episode, as I mentioned, we're going to have a discussion about why a trucking organization was fined $700,000 because they made the mistake of asking people in our country to prove they were here legitimately. By the way, you're going to hear Tom and Rick both tell you that you're required by law to inquire. The other thing, as I mentioned, guys, we're going to go back and discuss what's going on in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, any number of our major cities. And I do want to bring up something again about our borders and its impact on about 10 cities so far. So I thank you for joining us. I thank you, Rick. I thank you, Tom. Rick, you'll hopefully going to join us on the next episode. I do remind you, OperationTruthOfficial@gmail.com is the vehicle in which you may communicate with us and become part of this discussion. So everyone is clear, we pursue these topics in this show because of our concern and our interest regarding the future of our children, which, to be honest with you, is not looking real good, contrary to what anybody might want to delude themselves into thinking. With there's trouble in paradise, guys. And the three of us at this point, along with Brian, TJ, Brian Williams, that is, and TJ Stone, are committed to trying to change this conversation. We're hoping to continue to garner support. We have people interested in what we have to say, and I think you can tell by listening to this podcast, the level of legitimacy and experience and background that Tom and Rick both bring to this. You can't quantify its value. In any case, guys, thank you for joining us. We're going to bring you back the next episode, these topics. Tune in, and we look forward to hearing from you.